Okay, thank you. So now let's just generate a brief bodhicitta motivation for this evening's session. Think the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. And my reaching enlightenment depends on my understanding, studying, practicing, and accomplishing the path to enlightenment. So in order to do that, amongst many other activities, I need to study Dharma books. So tonight I'm going to participate in this session. It talks about the publishing of the teachings of our teachers, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in order to reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. Okay, thank you very much. So, I don't know, Charmaine, is this? Yeah. Well, I was asked to speak, initially I was asked to speak a little bit about the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, which I'm currently managing, and I felt couldn't really do that without talking about what came before the archive, which started in its present incarnation in 1996, 25 years ago. And what came before that was wisdom publications, and what came before that was a little sort of ad hoc publishing at Kopan Monastery. So thought I'd try and briefly paint the whole picture. So just very briefly about me, I was born in Australia. I studied medicine at Melbourne University, graduated in 1964. Practiced for a number of years, mainly in hospital settings, 7 years actually. And for one reason or another, got a bit disillusioned with medicine and decided to take a break from it. So my girlfriend at the time and I decided we'd leave Australia. She was a nurse I met in my last hospital posting in Brisbane, where I'd been for a couple of years. Otherwise, I spent the first 30 years of my life in Melbourne. So we had this plan to travel the world for 4 years. And our first stop was Bali, which is first stop for a lot of Australians getting out of the country. And so we just kind of chilled in Bali for a couple of months, and you know, had a pretty good time actually. Just going to the beach every day, eating coconuts for lunch, which is one of Rinpoche's favourite stories. The girlfriend was Marie Obst, who later became the nun Yeshe Kadro, and has been in Australia for a long time now, back in Australia. So a couple of months in paradise, even that got boring, so we decided to set off on the rest of our trip. Now, initially we'd planned to sort of hop around the Pacific Rim to the various capitals, Jakarta, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, I forget the order now, but Hong Kong, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Tokyo, and then fly across the Pacific to Vancouver, and then take the train from Vancouver to Toronto. So we'd kind of do Canada that way. I had 3 of my medical student doctor friends who were doing graduate work in Toronto. So I was going to visit them, hang them for a while. Then we're going to go down through the States, Central America, South America, all the way to the bottom, then get a boat to Cape Town, then sort of wind our way up through Africa and finish up after 2 years in London. Then we're going to try and do some work in London for a few months, maybe just make a little money and get ready for the return trip. And then we'd return through Europe, the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, and back to Australia. That'd be the second half. But in Bali, we met all these freaks and hippies coming across from America and Europe who'd regaled us with tales of the mystic East. And it seemed much more interesting to go the other way to India, Nepal, and and then maybe back through Afghanistan and kind of reverse hippie trail it to Europe that way. It was a bit vague actually, but so we scrapped our plans to go to Canada and all that, and we decided to stay in the East. So we travelled from Bali to Sumatra, from Bali to Java to Sumatra, then to Penang, and then we hitchhiked up through Thailand. This is 1972, by the way. Hitchhiked up through Thailand to Bangkok, and traveling through Thailand like that, we saw a lot of monks and temples and Buddha statues and a lot of external manifestations of Buddhism. So I wasn't the slightest bit spiritually inclined at all. I was, I don't think I kind of categorized myself. But looking back, I was probably what you call a scientific materialist, an atheist. But I thought as a dutiful tourist, I should maybe find out a little bit about the culture of this country. So I went to a bookstore and I actually stole my first book on Buddhism. So there's a little lesson in karma. I'm still kind of trying to work that one off, I think. It was this book, not this exact book, but this book, Buddhism by Christmas Humphreys, who was an English High Court judge who had started the Buddhist Society in London in 1924. I think when he was still a law student or he'd just graduated. So this was my first Dharma book, which I stole because we were living on $1 a day and that didn't extend to buying books. So then we hitchhiked up through the rest of Thailand towards Laos, and we went across the river Mekong to Vientiane, and there I started reading this book. And as I was reading it, and I can't even remember what I was reading, but maybe it was about karma or emptiness or something. I had this very strange sensation in my heart that, this stuff sounds like it could be true. And true not in the sense that an anatomy textbook is true, but true somehow in a deeper sense, which was I think I call it my second religious experience. My first religious experience was when I was 17 and I heard my first live jazz band. so this was my second, reading this book led me to my second religious experience. And in the book, he talks a lot about the importance of meditation. And, I didn't really know what that was, but I sort of made a mental note to find out. So then we traveled in Laos for a week or two, a couple of weeks, I think. And, there's a war going on at that time, 1972, and there were terrorists all over the ground. So actually we had to fly from Vientiane to the royal capital, the old royal capital of Luang Prabang. And then from there we flew to a city in the northwest of Laos, on the other side of the Mekong. And then we crossed back into Thailand and down to Bangkok. And then from Bangkok, we went to Burma, and we spent a week in Burma. And that was really a beautiful experience. It was so, I don't know if any of you have been to Burma, but it was so quiet. There was no motorized transport through most of the country, just in Rangoon. So then we took a train up to Mandalay, and then we took the river back down to Pagan, the old royal capital, which is an amazing place, and then back to Rangoon, and then to Calcutta, flew to Calcutta. And in Bangkok, I'd lent this Danish friend some money to go back to Copenhagen, and with the agreement to meet sometime later in the year, October, November, in Kathmandu, for him to repay me. So that's kind of where we were headed, Kathmandu. So then from Calcutta, we went overland to Kathmandu, and when we got off the bus at the bus station in Kathmandu, we ran into this Brazilian guy, Jose, who we'd also known in Bangkok and Bali, and I asked him if he'd seen the Danish guy. He hadn't. So then he took us to his hotel, and then he showed us around Kathmandu, where to eat, where to listen to music, where to buy dope, all important things. And then, sort of as an aside, he said, "Oh, and if you're interested in Buddhist meditation, there's a meditation course starting next week at this little monastery outside of Kathmandu." That was Kopan. And so I thought, oh yeah, Buddhist meditation, that's what I wanted to find out more about. So so we went up to Kopan. At this point, Marie Yeshikada was a slightly reluctant seeker. She was kind of a recovering Catholic, and wasn't in a hurry to get into another religion. But I sort of prevailed on her to check it out. So we went up to Kopan and found that indeed the course was starting the following week. So it was cheaper to stay there and do the course for a month than stay in Kathmandu. And since we had to wait for the Danish guy, we decided to do the course and save money at the same time. So, of course, if someone had told me what was going to happen if I did this course, I probably wouldn't have gone, but fortunately nobody told me. So we got up there, and there were about 54 people, I think was the official count. And this was the third course that had been given, the third meditation course. The first one, Lama Zopa Rinpoche had given in the spring of 71, and the second course had been given in the spring of 72. And during that year of 72, between the second course and the third one, which is the one that I finished up at as my first course, they built this little gompa. And anyway, if you look in volume 1 of Big Love, the whole blow by blow is there. So I'm not going to repeat all that. So the first morning we rocked up to the Gompa. We were staying at an old Nepali schoolhouse at the base of the hill. There are probably 15 or 20 of us staying in this kind of pretty rough sort of dormitory accommodation. And so we had to get up early in the morning, 5:15, and trudge up the hill. It was quite cold, and then sit on this concrete floor. The wooden floor hadn't been put in yet, and sit for an hour and a half in meditation when a lot of us had never meditated before. So it was kind of throwing in the deep end. And then Rinpoche came to give the first discourse. And when we signed up, we were given this book. This is called The Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun of the Mahayana Practice. So this this is, Nepali, sort of a rice paper cover, and it was printed from wax stencils with an old Gestetner duplicating machine. I don't know if anybody, you all look too young to remember what a Gestetner is, or some of you are old enough, good. But you type the wax stencils and then you strap it to a drum and you wind it around by hand or electrically, and the paper feeds through and you get this kind of smudgy kind of print. And so this was pretty much the first FPMT publication ever. And it had been put together by the students at the second Copan course, the one in the spring of '72. And so they put this together. You see it's the holes punched and it's tied by what looks like a shoelace. So, what's the word? I can't think of the word, sort of, it's a very ethnic kind of production anyway. So that was the wish-fulfilling golden sun. So, and the first page, how the mind is beginningless. And so Rinpoche would, he gave, the first one or two discourses were kind of a pep talk about why we should be studying and practicing Dharma. And then he started on the book. He would read a sentence or a paragraph or something, and then he'd give a short or a long commentary. It could be 2 or 3 sentences, or it could go for a couple of days. There was no telling. And so we started working our way through the book. Hour and a half meditation every morning before breakfast, and then Rinpoche would give a 2 or 3 hour discourse before lunch, and then after lunch we'd have discussion groups with some of the older students, and then Rinpoche would come around 4, give another discourse. Then there'd be a break for sort of a light dinner, and then there'd be another meditation in the evening, and then we go to bed, and the next day do it all again. So that went on relentlessly for 4 weeks. So after about 1 week, we were in one of the breaks, we were sitting on the front steps of the Kopan Gompa. So there's this new Gompa, and there was a flight of steps, and there was a little landing and another flight of steps down the bottom. And the students were sitting one behind the other on these steps, picking lice out of each other's hair all the way down. And so that's what we did in the breaks. And on one of these occasions, Anila Ann, the late Anila Ann McNeil, who was a Canadian nun, who was one of the Lama's first Western students, and in the second group, Zena was the first, Zena Rashevsky, who sort of discovered the Lamas in Darjeeling and brought them to Nepal. And Anne and Sister Max, Mummy Max, she's right down there in Santa Fe. She and 1 or 2 other people with the second group of people ordained by the Lamas. So Annie Lan came up to me and said, "Oh, I heard you're a doctor." And I was like, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, could you come and see Lama?" So I said, "Okay." I didn't know who she meant, because as far as I knew, Rinpoche was the Lama, the only Lama there. And but we went down the back to the old house, and Rinpoche was living in the new Gompa, but Lama Yeshe was still staying in the old house where that had, the building that had been on the property when they first rented it. And he had bashed his leg on a glass-top coffee table and the wound had got infected. So I found out that he had chronic rheumatic heart disease from having had rheumatic fever when he was a child. And that if you have an infection, gets in your blood, it can be quite dangerous if you've got a damaged heart valves. So he needed a course of penicillin. So we sent down to pharmacy in Kathmandu and got a bunch of procaine penicillin. And anybody who's a nurse will know that it's quite viscous. It's quite hard to squeeze out of the syringe. So, and you have to kind of warm it up a little bit to make it slightly less viscous, and then you inject it. So I did the warm up and I swabbed Lama's holy buttocks, and but I forgot to tighten the barrel of the syringe and the needle. So when I squeezed the plunger down, the thing popped out of the needle and penicillin went all over the wall, and the needle was left swinging in Lama's holy buttock. So right there, you're sort of drawing blood from a Buddha, one of the 5 extreme negative actions. But well intended. And so Lama turned around and said, well, why don't we try again tomorrow, dear? So I was kind of a little embarrassed, but anyway, we tried again tomorrow and that worked. And then we cleared up the infection eventually. But anyway, that's how I met Lama Yeshe. So this course went on, and for the first week or so, I kind of felt that, a lot of these concepts were really quite nonsensical. And I felt that I was the person that Buddhism had been waiting for 2,500 years to prove it wrong. And so I kept challenging Rinpoche with all these smart intellectual questions and everything. And he very patiently answered, until the other students had had enough and they told me to shut up, which I finally did. And then I wrote down all my questions in the back of my notebook. And then I found as the course went on that a lot of the questions were sort of automatically answered anyway. But by the end, there was still a number of unanswered questions. And although even halfway through the course, we were discussing how we were going to go to Goa for the winter, after the course finished, by the end, there was no leaving Kopan. And we went to the top of the hill for a group photo, as sort of became a bit of a thing after the Kopan courses in those days anyway. And after the photo, I remember going up to Rinpoche and thanking him for changing my life. So so I knew something had happened, And although I wasn't really totally convinced about everything, I knew I couldn't walk away from it either. So around that time also, I said to Anila Ann, the Canadian nun who was assisting Rinpoche, I said, I think I want to do Dharma, and I'm not even sure what I meant by that, but I want to do Dharma, but I don't have that much money. How would I support myself if I just wanted to do Dharma? And she looked at me as if I was a bit simple, and she said, "Oh, if you give yourself to the Dharma will always look after you." So I was like, "Oh, okay." So here we are. So far, so good, right? 50 years. Thank you, Dharma. Anyway, so then I had an interview with Rinpoche, and I told him, this is a life-changing book, but it's kind of rough. It kind of needs needs a bit of work, could be edited a little bit. And he said, oh, well, that was just put together by students from the previous course. Actually, I have some ideas of how I'd like to revise the thing from beginning to end. If you like, you could work with me on it. So I was like, okay, I like. So then Yeshikado and I spent, I think, at least 6 weeks between the third and the fourth course. The fourth course was in the spring of '73, and earlier than, anyway, it was in March. It wasn't exactly 6 months between the courses. So for 6 weeks between the two courses, we went, Yeshikado and I spent hours every day with Rinpoche going through the whole thing. I would write down what the new material, what he was saying, and then she would type it up, and then I would edit the TypeScript, and so gradually we created a new wish-fulfilling golden sun in time for the fourth course. So this was the one that we produced for the fourth course. So, nice binding, and it was printed in Kathmandu. Still, with the wax, you can't really see properly, but still with the wax stencils, but a little more, we found a slightly more professional outfit, and it was all typed on the one typewriter. The other one, the previous one, had been typed by different people on different typewriters, so it was a bit of a mess. So this was the second edition. And then between the fourth and the fifth course, and then between some of the other courses, Rinpoche and I would do more work on it. So, there was a different edition came for the fifth and the sixth courses. And then when the Lama started traveling, this one of the first Lam Rim courses in Australia, this was produced by Venerable Robina. Her family had a printing company in Melbourne. I think this was printed there. You could ask her. Commando Printing, that sounds like her company, doesn't it? Commando Printing Services. So I think that was Robina's father's company. And this was printed. So this was a much nicer edition, the comb binding and everything. So then, different editions came for different courses until about 1978, when Rinpoche stopped using it for the courses. I don't know why exactly. And so Rinpoche stopped using it, and then he started teaching from the Essential Nectar or other texts. Now, so at the so the third course, there were about 54 of us, and then so we did the work, and then we produced a new edition of Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun. And then at the fourth course, there were about 120 people came to the course, so like more than double. And after the course, after my first course, we did a Lam Rim retreat. There were these little retreat cabins called the Sangha House that had been built at Kopan. And I wasn't really quite sure how to do analytical meditation. So the way I did it was I would visualize, my mother or my brother or some other friend in front of me, and I would be explaining whatever it was I was meditating on: perfect human rebirth, impermanence and death, refuge, karma, whatever it was. And so I'd be explaining this as I understood it. and then they'd be arguing back, refuting these ideas, and then I'd refute back, and then we'd have this debate, which I always won. And but by the end of this session, I was so sort of fired up that I'd write them a letter, and which you're not supposed to do in retreat either. But anyway, what did I know? So by the end of the retreat, I had all these 15 or 20 letters to people in Australia that I'd written, and then we posted them all. And you know, a lot of my more dissolute friends thought, what a great opportunity, what a great excuse to go to Kathmandu and smoke dope legally. So so a lot of them, on the pretext of wanting to come to the course, they came to Nepal to, you know, the hippie Mecca. And, but they did the course, and including my mother. And she wasn't there to smoke dope. She was there to rescue me from the cult. And so then most of them went back, and then as a result of that, they invited the Lamas to Australia for the next year, for 74. And so I think as a result, and so at the fourth course, there are about 20 or 25 people who are friends or people who either got my letters or had read them. So so that was kind of why Australia, I think, got a head start on the other countries in terms of FPMT and centres being started there, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, and then it was sort of the beginnings of the Australian mafia. You know, there was me and Yeshe Kadro, and then later on Roger, and then Holly. So, you know, all these Australians sneaking in incredibly powerful positions in the FPMT. So anyway, in the first summer, summer of 73, a bunch of us went up to Laudo, where everybody knows it's where Rinpoche is from. He's the Laudo Lama. And as well as working on the wish-fulfilling Golden Sun with Rinpoche, we set up, Yeshe Kadro and I set up a medical clinic. So I wrote to a lot of the drug companies in Australia. They sent stuff. I had a lot of the people who came to the fourth course bring medicines and bandages and all kinds of other stuff. So we had started quite a nice little clinic there at Kopan. And in the summer of 73, we took the clinic up to Laudo. And so there are about 6 of us there that summer. And you know, Dick Robinson and his girlfriend Meredith were up there. He was sort of facilities manager. Gareth Sparham was there. He and Meredith, I think, they were looking after there were about 25, 30 young monks, Sherpa monks there. So in those days, the Sherpa monks used to come to Laudo in the summer, which is where most of them came from at that time. And in the winter, they'd go down to Kathmandu, to Kopan, and in the summer, they'd go back up. And that went on for 2 or 3 years until the numbers grew and it was impractical to travel up and down. So then they stayed in Kopan for the year round. But in those 72, 73, 74, they came up for the summer to Laudo. So Gareth and Meredith, I think, were teaching English, and we were running the clinic and just helping around the place. And then I got hepatitis because before going up there, some of my friends from Australia had got hepatitis, and as I was bidding them farewell to go to Laudo, I smoked a joint with them, and 6 weeks later I turned yellow. And so then we were staying in a little house that Rinpoche, or belonged to the monastery or to Rinpoche, about 15 minutes walk down from Laudo Gompa. and it was difficult. I was totally wiped out, so I had to stay home. And so what I did was I had my notes from the third and the fourth course, and I had the notes, more extensive notes from a guy called Brian Beresford, who was at the course with his wife Marie. They'd come from Dharamsala, and he was studying Tibetan, and he finished up translating a bunch of stuff later on. And so I started working on editing my notes and his notes into a commentary on the wish-fulfilling Golden Sun. So, so I'll show you that now. So this is the commentary. So this is, I don't know how many pages because they're numbered in sections, but you know, this was, so it would be like, we give the page number or the quote from the wish-fulfilling Golden Sun, and then we'd attach Rinpoche's commentary to it. So as I was working on that, I realized by taking notes, just by taking notes, we're really missing a lot of what Rinpoche says. So I determined, and we didn't have electricity at Kopan at the time, and we didn't have any tape recorders either. So I determined that at the next course, the fifth course, after we came back down from LYWA to Kopan, I would try to write down everything he said. So, so at that course, I plonked myself right down in front of his throne and started scribbling. So Rinpoche spoke in those days a little more slowly, and he repeated himself a little more than I think he does now. So it was not that difficult to pretty much write down everything he said. What was difficult was to read it afterwards, because, you know, everybody knows about doctors writing, and I was making up abbreviations for his Dharma terms as we went along too. So a little miracle was that Yeshikaro could read my writing better than I could. So she typed it all up, and then I edited that. And she also typed up my notes from the third and the fourth course, Brian's notes from the third and the fourth course. And we finished up with a second volume. So this was called Meditation Course Notes, Volume 1. And we weren't just being optimistic, because it was printed at the same time as Meditation Course Notes, Volume 2. So this was the fifth course, right? This was the fifth course. So the fifth course, there were 200 people, and there were too many to fit in the Gompa. So we had to put up a tent in the backyard of Kopan. And so the fifth, sixth, and seventh courses were in this big tent thing in the backyard. And then we built a more permanent tent on the side of the hill with an actual corrugated iron roof and something a little more permanent, that many of the subsequent courses were held in that so-called permanent tent. But anyway, so in order to print these two volumes of course notes, which are Rinpoche's commentaries on Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun, we asked Lama if we could buy our own Gestetner duplicating machine, and he gave us permission to do that, which was really a surprise because he hated spending money. And but he could see a lot of benefit, and it's true. We printed a lot of books there, and all the monks finished up printing their own texts as well. They would write on the stencils with steel tip sort of pens, you know, with stylus, and carve into the wax, and then they would print it. And so they started printing their own texts. So we had quite a little publishing operation going there at Kopan. So this is 73, 74, 75, like that. And the sixth course happened in the spring of 74. 250 people showed up for that. And that was just more than Kopan could handle. So and it was raining, and the tents that we'd rented for people were a bit leaky. And so it was very uncomfortable. And a lot of people left, 70 people left. And, Rinpoche made sure they left by teaching for 10 days on attachment and the lower realms. So that kind of got rid of the tourists and left the hardcores there. So, and so we finished up actually printing the notes on that. This was actually printed in Australia. And so this is even a much better production. And, this was the sixth course. So much better printing. It was printed offset. And I don't know if anybody knows Pam Cowan from Seattle, the immigration lawyer. Pam Cowan, she typed this one up. Otherwise, she and Sally Barreau from New Zealand did a lot of the typing. And Sally finished up taking the sixth and the seventh courses in shorthand and typing that up. We never printed the seventh course. All these courses are online at lamayeshe.com now. I think there have been 52 courses. More than half of them are online now. Every word Rinpoche said. Well, pretty much. So that was our little, mum and pop printing and publishing operation up at that point. As I mentioned, the Lamas went to the States, they came to America, and Australia and New Zealand in 1974 at the invitation of their students. So, most of the students who came to Kopan didn't hang around like some of us did, didn't get ordained like some of us did, they went back. But they'd been turned on by the Dharma and they wanted to share it with their family and friends, so they started inviting the Lamas to the West. So in 74, they did this trip to the States and Australia and New Zealand. So then they got back, and then we had the seventh course. While I'd been working on the commentaries to the third and fourth courses up in Laudo, recovering from hepatitis, which I did fully, but they still won't allow me to be a blood donor. Working on the teachings on the perfect human rebirth, as I'm sure you know, there are 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses. And the second, third, and fourth richness, the second is being born in the center of a religious country, as Rinpoche terms it. And he defined religious country 2 ways. One is geographically, which would be Bodh Gaya. But the second one, a religious country, is where the lineage of the ordinations still exist, where it's possible to take ordination as a layperson or as a monk or nun. So that was advantage of having that richness was that you could get ordained as a monk or nun. The third one was having perfect organs. So there are certain disabilities that disqualify you from getting ordained. And I didn't have any of those. So I thought, oh, well, I don't have those disabilities, so it's possible to get ordained. And then the fourth one is not having committed one of the 5 extreme negative actions. So, which were, killing your father, killing your mother, killing an arhat, drawing blood from a Buddha, or causing a schism in the Sangha community. So I think my failed first injection of Lama didn't really count as drawing blood from a Buddha, because it didn't really bleed. And so I got a pass on that one. And so I thought, well, I've got these three richnesses, the main benefit of each of which is you can get ordained. Maybe I should get ordained. So that was a bit of a shocking thought. But anyway, I kind of thought about it. Kind of kept it to myself. I didn't say anything to the others at that point. And then one day when I was there working on the teachings, this Tibetan guy showed up on the door, knocked on the door, and he was selling stuff. And he was selling an old set of robes and some other, a Buddha statue and a little gao. I don't know if you know what a gao is. It's those little metal house things that contain holy objects that Tibetans wear around their waist, depending how big it is, as an amulet. I mean, they're all different sizes, and a couple of other things, There was a stone that he said had been squeezed by a yogi. It was kind of in the, you can imagine if you took putty and squeezed it, it would come out in a certain shape. So there was a stone that fit in your hand like that. He said had been squeezed by a yogi. Anyway, I was a sucker for this stuff. So I bought this set of robes and some of the other stuff, thinking that, well, even if I don't need them, I can sell them back in Kathmandu for a profit. So, good Jewish boy. So then Yeshikata came back from the Gompa that day. I said, guess what? I bought today. She was like, what? I said, I bought some robes. She was like, you bought what? So then I fessed up that I was thinking of maybe becoming a monk. So I think she probably rolled her eyes or something. And anyway, I don't remember further details, but I finished up bringing those things back to Kathmandu. And after the fifth course, which was the one at the end of 74, the fifth course, the end of 73, a bunch of people had come over from Dharamsala for the fifth course, John Landau and Thupten Pende and Thupten Wongmo, a whole bunch of people. And then some of us had Thupten Chökyi, Spring Livingston, and there are a bunch of people that had been at Kopan, the third and the fourth courses, Gareth, Sparham, Marcel, Ursula, Bernice. Anyway, there are about 10 of us, either from Kopan or from Dharamsala, who Lama had given permission to get ordained. And he got us together to form his Western Sangha, the International Mahayana Institute. So he gave us that name in December 73. And then we all trooped off to Bodh Gaya in January 74 to get the Kalachakra initiation from His Holiness. So for a lot of us, that was our first highest Yoga Tantra initiation, first meeting with His Holiness. And then His Holiness Ling Rinpoche, His Holiness Senior Tutor, gave us the ordination. So you need an abbot and 4 other monks for the ordination. So Ling Rinpoche was our abbot, and the 4 other monks were Serkong Rinpoche, Lati Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So it was a pretty amazing group of lamas, really, And I'm sorry most of us finished up kind of letting them down. But if the Thupten Pemo I see there is the Thupten Pemo, I think it is, she's one of the few people who remained in the fold all this time, 47 years later. And she and Yeshikado. Thupten Wongmo is a nun, but she had a break of a year or so in the middle. But the rest of us, 4 monks and 6 nuns, the rest became lay people. So that was what made me decide to become a monk, working on Rinpoche's teachings on the perfect human rebirth. And so then in 74, the Lamas went to the West, and before the Lamas went to the West, Lama gave us a Vajrasattva initiation. So a bunch of people did a group retreat at Kopan that summer of 74, and 8 or 10 of us went up to Laudo and did retreat. 3 of the nuns did retreat in this house that we first stayed in the previous year at Ganukpa, this little bit away from the Gompa, and Thupten Pende did his retreat down in the nunnery at Tamo, which is down the hill from Laudo. Peter Kedge and Harvey Horrocks did theirs in a house that they rented in Mendi, which is in a little landing just down from Laudo Gompa. I was in the Charok cave. Ngowan Churdak was in another smaller cave above me. So I think that's pretty much the group that was at Laudo. And the Lamas went to the West. And so that after their trip to the States, they went to Australia and New Zealand, and then some land was offered for a centre in Australia, and they founded Chenrezig Institute there. So then they came back, and then I was. They left Annie Ann in Australia to run Chenrezig Institute. So she'd been Rinpoche's assistant at the previous Kopan courses. So for the 7th course, after I came down from Laudo, the Lamas came back from the West. I got the job of being Rinpoche's assistant at the 7th course. And then after that, the Lamas had been invited to a bunch of other places for 1975. So I got the job of being the roadie on that trip. So in February of 75, we left on quite a long trip. It was nearly 9 months. We went to Dharamsala. First, we went to Darjeeling to pick up some of Rinpoche's stuff that had been left at the monastery in Darjeeling, where they first met Zena back in 67. And then we went to Dharamsala, and then a bunch more people got ordained. And then we went to Bangkok for a weekend seminar that it was arranged by Dick Robinson and Meredith Hassan, who'd been in Laudo, the 73. And then they went to Australia, and it was that was the first course at Chenrezig Institute. The students there, under Anila Ann's direction, had built a Gompa, and then went to New Zealand, then California, Indiana, London, Switzerland, and Italy, and then back to India. So, and there were courses in all those places. So then, we got back, and then it was the 8th course, and Marcel was Rinpoche's assistant there for the 8th course. So, so after the 8th course, this American guy, Jesse Sartain, who'd been studying in Dharamsala, showed up at Kopan after the 8th course. It was December, and said he had a small publishing company in Hawaii, and he wondered if he could publish the teachings that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche had given in America in 1974, their first trip to the West. So because I was running the publishing at Kopan, Lama called me over and said, look, this guy wants to publish our teachings, make some kind of deal with him, but don't give anything away. We can do a joint publication with him. We keep the copyright, and we're going to call our publishing company Publications for Wisdom Culture, and we'll do a joint publication. So Jesse was okay, and those teachings were edited by John Landau and Alex Berzin, and this became the first. It was published in this sort of magazine format, printed in Hawaii, Wisdom Energy. It's in a more standard book format now, with some actually extra material. So this was the first wisdom book. A photo is from the New Zealand Herald. It was they made the front page of the New Zealand paper in their trip in '75. So that was the start. That was how Wisdom Publications started. And just after that, Brian Beresford, whose notes I'd relied on from the fourth course when I edited the first volume of course notes, he'd been studying with Geshe Rabten and Geshe Dage in Dharamsala, and he'd translated some of their teachings, and he wanted to publish them as a book called Advice from a Spiritual Friend. So this is not the actual, the first edition of this was printed in India. So it wasn't as well done as this one by Wisdom Publications. This is the third or fourth edition. It's been printed in all kinds of formats over the years. But Brian wanted to be supported by Lama and get a monthly stipend, but Lama said, no, we're not going to commit ourselves like that. Just each time he's got a book that needs to be published, he can bring it to us and we'll, sling him some money at that time, but he didn't want to make this regular deal. So, but we printed, so this became Wisdom's second book, Advice from a Spiritual Friend, which is some Lojong commentaries by Geshe Rabten and Geshe Ngon Dage. Geshe Dage's commentary is the Jewel Rose of the Bodhisattva, and Geshe Rabten's is on the 7-point thought transformation. So then Lama thought, well, we should get a little more serious with Dharma, with our publishing. We got 2 books out, and in '76, Peter Kedge became the Lama's attendant. So for the next 4 or 5 years, Peter traveled with the Lamas, and one of his main jobs was to be a book distributor, in the sense that he had to carry suitcases of these publications on the trips to all the centers. And, Peter was pretty muscular in those days, so he became even more muscular. And carrying these books, as well as the Lama's hand luggage. In fact, Peter said that in Milarepa's time, the disciples were known, the good disciples were recognized by having calluses on their buttocks from sitting for years in meditation. But the modern day disciples will be known for calluses on their shoulders from carrying the guru's hand luggage. So if you've ever seen how Rinpoche travels, you'll know exactly what I mean. So one of the students that went, so the Lamas went, they traveled in '75, in '76. They went to Europe and Australia, and one of the students at the Australian course at Chenrezig was Venerable Robina, who was just Robina then. She became Venerable a year or 2 later. And she came to Kopan for the course in '77, I think it was. And in the November course in 77. So once the Lamas started traveling from 75 onwards, there was only one Kopan course a year. 72, 73, 74, there were two. So then it became the November course, which, as you know, continues to this day, except last year. So then Venerable Rabina was ordained around the end of 77, beginning of 78. And Lama, because of her publishing experience, both, printing from the family company and her publishing experience in London earlier, he asked her to work with me on wisdom publications. So we figured it would be better in Delhi rather than Nepal. And and in the meantime, in 1977, Lama had kicked me out of the nest at Kopan and said, we need a center in Delhi. And he sent me to Delhi to try and start a center, which was interesting because we didn't really have any students in Delhi, and there was nobody in Delhi who wanted a center other than Lama, and he wasn't even in Delhi. But we did have one Indian student, a lady called Sunita, who was quite fond of the Lamas. She'd met them in Dharamsala. And so she agreed to help. So she made a lot of connections for us in Delhi. And in fact, she found the printer who printed Advice from a Spiritual Friend. And so, I was spending time looking for a suitable place for a center, and it was very difficult because there was no money and everything was very expensive. But in the meantime, she found us some accommodation, and Rabina came down to research typesetters and printers and so forth. And we were going to set Wisdom up in Delhi. But then came the summer of 78, and the Lamas went traveling, and Lama sent me to the West to teach some courses, and Rabina did a retreat, I think, in Dharamsala. And then we had the first CPMT meeting. Lama had founded the FPMT in 1975, just after Jesse had come wanting to publish Wisdom Energy. And there were about 9 of us Westerners there at Kopan. And one day I was standing on the steps of the Gompa with Lama, and he kind of looked way into the distance, and he said, I think we need an organization to keep all this together. So I was kind of looking to see what he was looking at, but he was just seeing in his mind's eye what this explosion of centers that was about to happen. And so he got the 9 of us to meet every evening and discuss how we would create an organization and what we'd call it and how it would function and so on, to make sure that all these current centers, and especially the new ones, didn't lose the plot. They did what they were supposed to do. So a bunch of us were meeting there every evening, and so first we wanted to call it the Yeshe Foundation, but Lama, he wouldn't even consider that, putting his name on it. So he said, no, we're going to call it he said, what are you guys? You're a council, aren't you? So we were a group of people meeting. So I said, yeah, we're a council. So he said, well, and so, what you're trying to do is create, I don't remember exact words now, but you're trying to create a foundation to preserve the Mahayana tradition. So we're going to call our organization the Council for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, CPMT. So that became our name, and it was sort of our mission statement as well, in 4 words. So later on, I think we explained to Lama that council is a group of people. A bunch of centers is more like a foundation. So we changed the name to Foundation FPMT, and then the council became what we called the meetings of the center directors, which initially were more or less annual, but then as time went on, they became less frequent. So the first one was held at Manjushri Institute, our centre at that time in England, in late summer of '78. That was the year Lama had invited His Holiness Song Rinpoche to the West, and he'd been giving teachings in America and England and Europe. And but a bunch of centre directors, there were 12 or 14 of us, I think, at the time, we met. And during that time of that meeting, Lama decided it would be better to base wisdom publications in the West. So we scrapped the plans to establish wisdom in Delhi. The Lama Yeshe sent for Rabina to come from India, and then he sent for John Landau to come from California to be the editor-in-chief. And he appointed Chris Kolb, Ngowan Chodak, a monk at the time, to be the director of wisdom. And then some of the nuns who were studying at Manjushri Institute, the Sanghi Kadro, Kathleen MacDonald, and Thich Nhat Hanh, and another American nun, Thupten Yeshe. I think mainly those three. They were editors. And I'd been working with them a little bit in India and Nepal, working on some of the Lama's teachings. So it all came together rather quickly at Manjushri Institute in Cumbria. And because John had been editing some of Lama's Christmas lectures, Lama used to give a Christmas lecture most years at Kopan around that time of year. It was quite easy to put together the first wisdom book published in the West, which was Lama's Christmas lectures, Silent Mind, Holy Mind. And so Venerable Rabina, I think, changed the name to Wisdom Culture, as it was a little snappier than Publications for Wisdom Culture. Although at that time, Lama was calling his centres Chenrezig Institute for Wisdom Culture, Vajrapani for Wisdom Culture, Vajrapani Institute for Wisdom Culture, Manjushri Institute for Wisdom Culture, this one for Wisdom Culture being the antidote to samsaric culture. And then Venerable Rabina, I think, commissioned the fantastic Tanka painter, Peter Iserly, to do the logo. So Peter made this stupa logo. And so this was the first book published with the logo, and it was printed in England, just a little slim hardback book, but it was ready for Christmas that year, '78. So it all came together very quickly. So then I was at that meeting, and then I went back to Delhi to try and get Tushita, to get the centre going, and the other directors went back to their centres, and the Lamas kept travelling, and wisdom started developing there at Manjushri Institute. After a year or so, maybe a couple of years, I think Lama replaced Ngowan Chodak as the director with English businessman called Hugh Clift. So he had a business in London, and he was able to put some of his own money in to support the company. And Venerable Rabina was looking after design and production and some of the editing, and John Landau was doing editing. And they published a couple of books of the Geshe there. And so then I was kind of missing publishing, running the centre. In '79, we found a beautiful house in Delhi for Tushita, Mahayana Meditation Centre. There was already a Tushita in Dharamsala, which had actually been established as a retreat centre for the FPMT, which wasn't called that then, in about '72. And in fact, that was the first director there who really developed the place at the beginning was Peter Kedge. And and then Peter was one of Peter and a couple of his English friends, including Harvey Horrocks, was one of the main people who found the building for Manjushri Institute in England and got that going. So, as well as carrying the Lama's hand luggage and Wisdom Publications books, Peter got the Manjushri Institute going, and he was the first director of Tushita as well. And he and Anne were the organisers of the third meditation course, the first one that I went to. So okay, this is getting a little longer than I expected. Never mind. So we found a beautiful house for the centre in Delhi, and over the first couple of years, 79, 80, we had some amazing teachings given there. And I thought it was a pity the 20, 30 people came to the teachings, but we had teachings from His Holiness Ling Rinpoche, His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, Song Rinpoche, Serkong Rinpoche, Geshe Rapton, Geshe Zopa, of course, Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. We organised teaching with His Holiness, and Bob Thurman gave some talks there, and there are some Indian teachers. So I put together this book in 81 called Teachings at Tushita, which were teachings that had actually been given at the centre in New Delhi. And so this was quite a nice book. In fact, this copy was dedicated to my mother by Lama Yeshe. And then later on, a few years ago, I've revamped it and we published it as Teachings from Tibet, published by the archive. It's basically the same teachings with a few extra ones. But Venerable Robina and Hugh Clift in London got a bit annoyed that I was setting up a rival publishing company. So they complained to Lama that if I wanted to do editing and publishing, I should be doing it for Wisdom. So Lama's, but I was in Delhi and they were in England. So Lama's solution, such as it was to appoint me the editorial director of Wisdom Publications. So I don't think that was the outcome they were looking for. But, and it didn't really work that well, but I had the title. And in the beginning of 82, we had what Lama called the Enlightened Experience celebration, where he arranged this big 4, 5, 6-month festival for all the Western monks and nuns. There were about 100 of us by that stage, and then a bunch of lay people wanted to come too. So we had a whole bunch of initiations and teachings from Lama Zopa in Bodh Gaya. And then after Tibetan New Year, we all went up to Dharamsala, and His Holiness Song Rinpoche gave 3 extensive commentaries. And we had other teachings. There was teachings from His Holiness and Ling Rinpoche and Serkong Rinpoche. And during that, I put out a call for editors, people who wanted to edit the teachings of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So we got a few volunteers from the Enlightened Experience celebration, and then over the next few months, some dropped out, some other people came in. And at the end of 82, beginning of 83, Lama gave his amazing teaching on the 6 yogas of Naropa at Lama Tsongkhapa Institute in Italy. And after that, the people who'd volunteered to become editors got together with John Landau. We rented 3 adjacent apartments down at the ocean, Cecina Mare, near Pamaya, near the centre in Italy. We got them quite cheap because it was winter, and 7 of us worked there for a couple of months. The idea was that each of us would take a manuscript teaching of Lama Yeshe's, and John Landau would sort of be our editing teacher and guide us in editing these teachings. So there was John and myself and Dutch monk Hermes Brand and English monk Steve Carlier and Sharon Gross, California, Robin Brentano from New York, Lee Bray, English student, and I think that's 7. And so we each had a manuscript. It didn't really work out as planned, and John found that it was really difficult to pass on his editing skills just like that. So, but we finished up getting a couple of books out of it: Introduction to Tantra, that John had edited, and Vajrasattva commentary that I edited. But during that retreat, Hugh Clift, the director of Wisdom, came to see Lama to hand in his resignation. So then Lama accepted and made me the director of Wisdom. So then I had to go back to Delhi and clean up my act there, and then come back to England to take over Wisdom. So at first there was just Venerable Rabina and Venerable Yeshikado and myself living in a tiny flat in the West End of London, and the friend Dennis allowed us to use his business office down the road for things that wouldn't fit into the flat. But eventually we rented a house in south of London, and then we rented an office in the West End of London in '84. And then we really started to develop Wisdom Publications. We had a business model where our aim was to publish 8 books a year, and I don't think we quite kept to that, but we published a lot of stuff over the years, and started to become known in the Buddhist publishing world. What else existed at that time was Shambhala Publications, which had started around '69, so they've been going for quite a while, and Snowline had also started around that a little bit earlier. In the late '70s, publishing mainly Glenn Mullan's translations at that point, so those became the 3 main Buddhist publishing companies: Shambhala, Snowline, and Wisdom. And the other 2 were private companies. Wisdom was the only non-profit. But the advantage the others had was that they were in America, and which was the biggest market. So in '87, we, a friend of Peter's from Hong Kong, Peter at this time had gone to Hong Kong to try to set up a business to make money for Copan and other FPMT activities. So a friend of his in Hong Kong, Glyn Manson, offered to help us distribute our books in the States. He had a business in Newburyport, just north of Boston, just north of where we are now. And he offered us space, and he offered us time and money to set up there. So we headquartered our American distribution in Newburyport, and that was run by a guy called Rand Engel, who had managed IMS in Barrie, the Insight Meditation Society. Rand managed that for 3 years. And then he came to manage the Wisdom distribution in the States. Things didn't really work out as we planned for one reason or another. I was getting the company deeper and deeper into debt in London, working more on faith than the business acumen. And so in '89, we decided, Rinpoche agreed that we could move from London to the States. In one of Glenn Manson's conditions for helping us in the States was that we incorporated here and that we had a board of directors and that we functioned as a proper company with a proper board. And so we created a board. It was Glenn and Peter Kedge and Australian guy George Farley and Adam Engel, who was the founder of the Mind and Life, and Rand Engel, and myself. I think that was, and Tim McNeil, who'd been involved. Tim had been at the fourth course at Kopan in '73. He was working in Afghanistan with the Peace Corps for a couple of years, and then he came back in '75. He was there for Yangtze Rinpoche's enthronement in the beginning of '75, and then he went back to the States and did his degree at Harvard, and he was working in business. And he'd contacted me in '85. One of the things we did in London was Lama had wanted the organization to have a magazine that sort of tied the whole thing together. And he wanted to call the magazine The Propagator, which sounded a little too much like rabbits for me. So I think we prevailed on Lama to accept, since we were doing the work, to call it the Wisdom magazine. So this was our first edition. This came out in '83. His Holiness meeting the Pope, and then before we could do the next edition in '84, Lama passed away in '84. So we at the end of '84, beginning of '85, we brought out this second volume of Wisdom magazine. So this is Lama Yeshe commemorative edition, and so then everything got too busy or crazy. We couldn't really do any more editions. But then the international office was starting to get organized, and initially from Kathmandu, and they started bringing out this kind of newsletter in the late '80s, which was called Mandala. So this was the actual forerunner of the magazine. This kind of, that was from '89, this is from '94. This one, this was like a newspaper thing. So that was how we were communicating. So Wisdom magazine became Mandala. I think Rinpoche gave the name. And another one from '89. So then that eventually became the Mandala that we know and love under the direction of Venerable Rabina. Eventually that started in the '90s, mid-'90s. So Rinpoche agreed that we could move to the States, and because we already had this office near Boston, and Tim was based in Boston, Rinpoche agreed that Tim could take over from me running Wisdom, and I was to become the editorial director. So then we started off in the States, in Boston, and gradually developed over the years under Tim's direction. After a couple of years, the money was still very tight, and it was kind of an issue. So I switched more from editing to become the so-called director of development, the fundraiser. And I spent a lot of my time as well as editing, trying to raise money, which, worked out okay. I think we were raising maybe $250,000 a year. So that really helped stabilize things, I think. And then but while all this was going on, what was getting neglected was the teachings of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, because they are very, they need a lot of editing and quite a lot of work. And from the business point of view, I mean, the money you would put in supporting editors and working on these teachings and everything, it could never be gotten back by selling the books. So it would have to be heavily subsidized. But, in the meantime, we're getting manuscripts from, Jeffrey Hopkins and all these other people, different people that were ready to publish. So kind of the low-hanging fruit, such as it was, kind of got dealt with first, and the Lama's teaching was always getting shoved to the back burner. So eventually we decided that we needed a separate entity. So at that time, we decided, or Rinpoche decided, to establish the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive as a separate FPMT entity to focus on the teachings of the Lamas. From the early days at Kopan, as I mentioned, we'd been writing down the Lama's teachings, and then in 74 or 75, we got electricity. Actually, Venerable Roger, in his previous life, was an electrician, so he helped wire a lot of Kopan in the early days. He got the name Electric. He was called Electric Roger, because there was another Roger, Roger Wheeler, was there, who worked with Marcel in a business to support the Sangha. He was called Office Roger. So we had two Rogers, Office Roger and Electric Roger, Roger Kunsang. So we had electricity, so then we could start taping the Lama's teachings and transcribing them. And then when the Lamas traveled around the world, one of the obligations the people who were putting on the teachings had was to record the Lamas. And so we started developing a collection of transcripts and tapes, but it was a little haphazard, and the centers weren't very good at doing it. It was somehow, with all the other things they had to do to organize a course from the Lamas, taping the teachings properly and either getting them transcribed or getting the tapes to wisdom was a lower priority. So it was a little haphazard. But still, we tried to get the archive going, such as it was at Wisdom in our office in London. And Venerable Sarah was involved in a lot of those early activities of cataloguing the tapes and transcripts. But then in the late 80s, Peter, who was running his business in Hong Kong, volunteered to take on developing the archive properly. So he came to the office in London and he collected all the stuff we had, the tapes and the transcripts, and took it all back to Hong Kong. And Venerable Ailsa Cameron was there a little bit later to help organize the whole thing. And Peter had Venerable Paula Chichester, Ningje. He sent her around the world to all the centers to scour all the centers' cupboards for all their tapes and transcripts of the Lamas, whatever had, and bring it all back. So then, Peter and Nicole, his wife, and Elsa with Jaffa Elias, she's in California now. They really put together the archive, and they worked out a cataloging system and really made it a thing. And then, in fact, Peter had a proposal that he made to the FPMT board back in 1990, a proposal how to develop what he was calling the Wisdom Clear Light Archive. Um, so that didn't, the FPMT never really took any responsibility for this activity somehow. So won't go into that. But they did an amazing job putting it all together. So then when I left Wisdom with Wendy, who I'd met, Wendy Cook, my wife, who I'd met in Melbourne in '91 at a CPMT meeting at Tara Institute. And then she came to Boston and she worked at Wisdom for 3 or 4 years doing marketing and publicity. We left to form the archive. And at that time, Chinese were taking over Hong Kong. Peter was winding up the business. So he sent everything to us. So it was like, being given a ready-to-eat meal without having to do all the hard work of preparing it. So we just took over and continued the work that they'd been doing. But we didn't have any money. So what I did was put together 3 teachings that I'd actually edited for some publications we were doing from Delhi earlier. And I put together this little booklet called Becoming Your Own Therapist. This was our first publication, and it was we sent it out. We sent thousands of them out all over the world, just to show people what was possible to do with the archive, and see if they wanted to support us. So we had incredible response to this, and so I thought, wow, this is, and people will really loved the fact that it was free. So I thought, well, okay, we've already established a publishing company. Maybe we can just do free books. Maybe that's something people would like. And it was also true when I was trying to raise money for Wisdom in Singapore and Malaysia and Hong Kong and Taiwan. People weren't used to donating money and then having the book sold. The Chinese Buddhist idea of sponsorship was you sponsor the book and you give it away. So that's what I was told. So when I met these people again, I said, how you told me that the tradition is to give money and the books are given away? Have I got a project for you? So that was, so we were able to raise quite a bit of money in the East, but also in the West. There are a lot of people who like the idea of doing free books. So so we sort of started doing it sort of by accident that way. And I think by now there must be more than 1 million free books out there of Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and then a few other teachers. So that's, in 20, 25 years. So I think that's, that worked out. And, giving ourselves to the Dharma looks after us. So I'm quite a bit over time, but, that's more or less how we started the archive. Then as we got busier and busier, we first relied on volunteers, but then we found volunteers weren't very reliable. So we had hundreds of hours of teachings to transcribe, both lamas. And so the only way to do it was to pay people to transcribe and to pay people to edit and to support people while they did this work. So, we struggled a little bit at first, but eventually we found some very major supporters who were incredibly generous and just made it possible for us to develop. And at one point, we've cut back a little bit now, last 2 or 3 years, but we had about 20 people working for us around the world. You know, some part-time, some full-time, some still volunteers. You know, we were able to move from our apartment, our condo where we started in '96, that was owned by friends, and we were allowed to live there rent-free. Then we moved to a house they had in the western suburbs of Boston, paying little rent. And then we, after 5 years there, we had to move to another place where we had to pay market rent, but we were able to afford that. And then when we had to move out of there, one of our extraordinarily generous benefactors bought the archive a house where we are now, and has supported us. So, you know, it's been really a dream run in terms of people supporting the archive work, and what we've been able to do, just publish all these books and then do so much, get so many more of the teachings transcribed and edited and published, or lightly edited and put online. You know, hundreds of hours of teachings online, and thousands of pages of transcripts, you know, aiming to put all the Copan courses online. So we're well on the way to that. We're creating books for wisdom publications. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to do more books, like, you know, Gordon McDougall has been doing a lot of editing work for wisdom with archive material, as well as editing stuff for the archive to publish. Like Rinpoche's teaching on bodhicitta, on 6 perfections, on patience, and there's another book coming out from Wisdom that Gordon edited from the archive, Power of Mantra. So we basically opened up the entire archive to Wisdom to edit whatever teachings on whatever subjects they want. So there's more books coming out by Wisdom, which is getting more professional distribution than what we were able to do. So looking ahead, what will probably eventually happen to the archive is that it will be absorbed into the FPMT education department when I step down, or get fired, or drop dead, or, you know, go gaga, whatever happens. And so with that in mind, we've actually bought a digital asset management system together with the FPMT. We're in the process of combining all our digital assets. You know, I haven't really touched on the publishing that the FPMT has done over the last 20 or so years, which was really spearheaded by Mary Colony. And she did an amazing job developing all that, you know, together with quite an amazing team over there. And, you know, that so we're in the process of uploading all our video. We have a lot of archival video, and they have all the video of Rinpoche that's been done over the, especially the last 20, 25 years. And of course, everybody's a videographer and a photographer now. And we're in the process of uploading transcripts, and we're in the process of uploading photos. We have tens of thousands of photos, historic photos that we collected, mainly initially prompted by, you know, needing them for Big Love. And but you know, there's so many more photos in the FPMT's archive, so all those are being uploaded to this digital asset management system, and then all the audio the tens of thousands, must be 20, 30,000 hours of audio that we have. That's all being uploaded. So there will be this huge database of FPMT teachings of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Ursel too. That it'll be all being in one place, and ideally the centers will have access to it, and like that. So, I mentioned, Wendy, who's my wife, who's been assistant director all this time, and then Jen Barlow came on more than 20 years ago. She was a former director of Kurukula Center here in Boston. She's been working with us for over 20 years. Couldn't have done it without her. She's does the IT, she does the accounts. She and Wendy curb my worst instincts. We've had Venerable Munsel has been our main transcriber for over a decade, and Megan Everett from in Portland has done an amazing job doing all our ebooks and our social media and doing the podcasts, doing an amazing amount of work, some of the other stuff we do. And Sandy Smith in Australia has been working with us for 8 or 10 years, doing our web editing and working on all our books. And since 2008, Annie Dessel has been our archivist, working with the transcribers and getting all the tapes transcribed and catalogued and into the archive, and sending out all our books. She does an amazing amount of work. So, and more recently, Stacey Martin has been helping Jen and Megan with some of our stuff, and Stacey puts together our e-letter, which goes out over my name, makes it look like I do all the work. I don't do anything. So, I've been so lucky to have these incredible women to work with, who, work much harder or more skillfully than I do. So, and there are a lot of others. Venerable Sarah did so much editing. Venerable Rabina's doing a lot of editing, and Venerable Elsa Cameron. So I'm sorry if I've left people out, but they're the main ones that come to mind. I mentioned Gordon McDougall doing so much editing more recently. And of course, it's because of the material that we've had to work with, the really holy and precious teachings of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, which are the reason that we're all here, the reason this organization exists, the reason this organization has been so successful, even though it never really set out to be. It's all happened organically and without a plan, as far as I know, and without any money, as far as I know. It's just initially, I mean, if 40, 50 years ago, it's been nearly 50, someone had described the organization as it is now, they would have been laughed out of Copan. I remember one time, there's this one guy, after the 5th course, this guy came up to me, American guy, who got very turned on by the teachings at the 5th course, and said, I was in a car accident last year, and I got $10,000 in an insurance payout, and I would like to offer that to Copan. I was like, $10,000. And I ran up to Lama Yeshe. I said, Lama, this guy wants to offer $10,000. We'll never need any more money again. You know, it was like, he was like, okay, whatever. So, you know, I mean, just couldn't imagine the organization as it is now. And it's because of the purity of the Lama's bodhicitta and the power of the Dharma and the, you know, the dedication that we all have to the Lamas and to their vision, even if we don't know what it is. And, you know, we're part of the, you know, some of the eyes and the hands of the Thousand Armed Chenrezig, just trying to help the Lamas accomplish their mission. So we're really lucky. I mean, we met the amazing Lamas, you know. I mean, you know, not just Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, mainly them, but their teachers too, you know. So, okay, I don't know, not sure what I was talking about, but that's what came out. And so I'm sorry, I'm way over time, but we haven't lost too many people. What should we do? Open it up or say goodbye?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nick.